Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the world of medieval queens, some of the most scandalous, powerful and daring women in history. These queens didn't just sit pretty on thrones. They played political games that were as complex and cutthroat as any we see today. Their stories are laced with drama, manipulation, passion, and sometimes outright rebellion. It wasn't just about wearing crowns. These queens used their wit, charisma, and cunning to shape entire empires. And, let's be honest, you probably won't survive this ride without a few raised eyebrows at some of their audacious moves. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is in your part of the world. I'm curious to know how far our bedtime history journey is reaching. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. We begin with an unexpected source of power, the mothers. Yes, these were the women who had just as much sway over medieval thrones as their daughters or sons did. It's easy to assume that queens became powerful simply by wearing the crown, but the reality is far more complex. Some never actually wore it themselves. Instead, they wielded their influence through cunning strategies, behind-the-scenes alliances, and manipulations that would make your head spin. Medieval queens often inherited their positions by bloodline, but their authority didn't just come from birthright. Many of these royal women had one thing in common: ambitious mothers who played an equally significant role in the political landscape of the time. Take, for example, the story of Agnes of Poitou. Born into nobility, Agnes knew how to maneuver through the intricate web of royal politics. In a way, she could be considered the first queen-maker, controlling the affairs of her children's rule while staying in the background. Historians still argue whether her subtle power-grabbing was the cause of the dynasty's political tensions or a necessary evil in a time when women's roles were restricted. But let's zoom in on the most infamous of these meddling mothers, the one who set the stage for centuries of political turmoil, Eleanor of Aquitaine. Now, Eleanor's influence is often seen as a force to be reckoned with. Born into one of the most powerful noble families in France, she was married off at the young age of 15 to King Louis VII of France. But rather than simply living the life of a docile, obedient wife, Eleanor was anything but conventional. When it became clear that Louis and Eleanor's marriage was unworkable, thanks in no small part to Eleanor's strong-willed nature and Louis's weak leadership, she took action. She divorced him, not because she was unhappy, but because she was, well, Eleanor. She wasn't content to be just the passive queen consort. She had grander plans. After her divorce from Louis, Eleanor didn't simply fade into the background like many queens would have. Instead, she married Henry Plantagenet, who would later become Henry II of England. And that's where things got truly interesting. Through her second marriage, Eleanor not only became Queen of England, but was also granted control over vast territories in France, known as Aquitaine. This made her an extraordinarily powerful figure, capable of influencing both the English and French crowns simultaneously. But the real intrigue came with her children. Eleanor's sons, especially Richard the Lionheart and John, were raised with one key lesson: they were born to rule. Historians still argue whether Eleanor actively encouraged her sons to rebel against their father, Henry II, or if it was merely a byproduct of a tense and complex family dynamic. But one thing is clear: Eleanor's influence over her sons was immense. Richard and John both took part in a major rebellion against their father, a move that nearly tore the English kingdom apart. Did Eleanor secretly support the revolt? Historians can't seem to agree. Some argue that it was a calculated move to ensure her children's success in a volatile political landscape, while others suggest that Eleanor's role was less hands-on and more passive, with the rebellion simply being the result of her son's own ambition. Regardless of the truth, Eleanor's name remains forever linked to her role as the queen who had the power to manipulate her sons into nearly toppling a king. But Eleanor of Aquitaine wasn't the only mother to use her children as pawns in the royal Game of Thrones. In fact, the practice of mothers controlling the destinies of their children, even if it meant sacrificing their own personal desires, was not unusual during this period of history. A similar story unfolds with Blanche of Castile, the mother of King Lear, of France. Blanche's influence over her son, particularly after the death of her husband Louis VIII, was profound. She ruled France on his behalf while he was still a child, deftly managing the kingdom's affairs. But Blanche didn't just wield power for the sake of it. She used her position to ensure that her son would grow up to be a just and capable ruler. Blanche's political acumen was legendary. She struck alliances with other European monarchs, negotiated peace treaties, and crushed rebellions within France. Her actions helped secure Louis IX's place on the throne, and many historians argue that without Blanche's behind-the-scenes work, Louis would never have risen to become the saintly ruler he is remembered as today. Yet her role was often overshadowed by the glory of her son's reign, which was precisely how she liked it. While Eleanor of Aquitaine revelled in the spotlight, Blanche was content to work quietly behind the scenes, manipulating events from the shadows. Was Blanche a queen-maker like Eleanor? Perhaps, but she was a queen-maker who preferred the quiet, unseen work of power over the flashy display of political rebellion. While these royal mothers were perhaps the most influential in shaping their children's paths to power, they were by no means the only ones. In fact, the rise of powerful queens in medieval Europe often relied on such manipulation. Queens were not merely symbolic figures. They were deeply involved in the politics of their time, often using their families, their marriages, and their children to secure dynastic power. The mothers of these queens often worked just as hard, if not harder, to maintain their legacies and ensure their children's reigns. As we move forward in this series, we'll see how these mothers' legacies continued to shape the lives of their daughters, granddaughters, and even great-granddaughters. The influence of medieval queens did not end with their own lifetimes. It lived on through their families and through the political structures they helped create. In many ways, the power they wielded was more than just royal. It was the power to shape history itself. But the question remains, were these women truly the masterminds behind the thrones, or were they simply playing a dangerous game, trying to secure their own positions in a world that was quick to discard them if they failed? Historians still debate the motives and actions of these powerful women, and we might never know the full extent of their roles. But one thing is certain, they weren't just queens, they were architects of kingdoms, wielding power in ways we still struggle to understand today. As we delve deeper into the lives of these medieval queens, we come to realize that the throne wasn't just about sitting in a gilded chair with a crown on your head. For many of these women, real power didn't come from a royal coronation, but rather from the shadows, behind the scenes where no one could see their every move. Some queens ruled through their husbands, others through their sons, but many of the most remarkable queens didn't need a throne to rule. They simply needed influence, and they were experts at pulling strings, orchestrating rebellions, and manipulating their way through the tangled politics of the time. One of the most captivating cases of secret rule comes from Catherine de' Medici. If there ever was a queen who played the long game, it was Catherine. Catherine's story begins with a scandalous backdrop. She was married to King Henry II of France in 1533, but their marriage wasn't the love story one might imagine. Catherine's true power didn't come from the affection of her husband, but rather her understanding of the intricate balance of power at court. Henry, though a strong monarch in many ways, was often too distracted by his favourite mistresses to fully focus on his queen. So Catherine took it upon herself to ensure her children were not just safe, but ready to inherit the throne. she made sure to fortify their position in the royal court, even though her own marriage had little to offer in terms of romantic affection. When Henry II tragically died in a jousting accident, Catherine's real reign began. She served as the regent for her sons, Charles IX and Henry III, who were both far too young to govern on their own. As regent, Catherine had unparalleled power, effectively ruling France through her sons. But her reign wasn't without conflict. France was embroiled in religious wars between Catholics and Protestants, and Catherine had to play both sides of the fence, making alliances with the Catholic nobility while also keeping the Protestants within reach. Historians still argue whether Catherine was an opportunist who used her sons' positions to further her own power, or if she was simply trying to protect them in a world that was constantly threatening to tear apart the French monarchy. Some argue she was nothing but a puppet master, manipulating the situation to ensure her family's survival. Others suggest that Catherine's decision-making was based on the chaos of her time, and she was simply doing what was necessary to protect her children's futures. Yet, for all her ability to navigate the political scene, Catherine was still a woman of her time. She had to work within a deeply patriarchal system, one that often saw her as nothing more than a vessel to ensure the royal bloodline continued. Even as regent, Catherine was constantly challenged by powerful men who didn't think a woman should be in control. Her savvy, however, ensured that she stayed in the game. Catherine knew when to hold her tongue, when to make strategic alliances, and when to pull the strings behind the curtain. Her political maneuverings were, and still are, the subject of much debate. Was Catherine simply a shrewd political operator, or did she truly love her children and act solely for their well-being? The answer, it seems, is more complex than either view suggests. This subtle kind of rule wasn't unique to Catherine. Other queens also found ways to govern without ever stepping into the public eye as true sovereigns. Blanche of Castile, for instance, was an equally shrewd and calculating figure in medieval France. As the mother of King Louis IX, she found herself thrust into the role of regent after the death of her husband Louis VIII. What followed was a masterclass in political strategy. Blanche didn't just step into the power vacuum left by her husband's death, she took control of it, navigating through the turbulent waters of French politics with remarkable success. As regent, Blanche was the mastermind behind many of the policies that would shape France for decades. She knew exactly how to wield influence, even though she never ruled in her own right. Historians still debate whether she was simply a regent doing her duty as a mother, or if she was more of a silent monarch, pulling the strings to solidify her son's future. And it wasn't just French queens who mastered this kind of indirect rule. Isabella of Castile was another queen who, although married to a powerful king, didn't rely on him to govern. She was the true architect of the Spanish Empire, especially in the context of her role in the Reconquista and the exploration of the New World. Isabella and her husband, Ferdinand of Aragon, were partners in governance, but it was Isabella who drove many of the key decisions that shaped Spain's future. Historians often give credit to Ferdinand for leading Spain during this period, but Isabella's influence was felt just as deeply, even though she was rarely at the forefront of public life. It was Isabella who made the fateful decision to sponsor Christopher Columbus's journey to the New World, a decision that would alter the course of history. But Isabella's real genius lay in her ability to make decisions behind the scenes, using her position to quietly shift the balance of power in Europe and beyond. Perhaps one of the most fascinating aspects of these queens' indirect reigns is how their power was perceived by those around them. Unlike modern leaders, these women were often not seen as true monarchs in the eyes of their subjects, especially when they governed as regents. They were often viewed as placeholders, temporary figures who only held power because their husbands or sons were incapable of ruling. Yet, in practice, these queens were often the ones making the tough decisions, charting the course of their kingdoms and ensuring the survival of their dynasties. Historians still argue whether these women were truly in control or whether they were simply figureheads who had to play their roles in an unforgiving world. What's clear, though, is that many of these queens wielded more power than history often gives them credit for. What makes these queens' stories even more intriguing is how their actions are often overshadowed by their male counterparts. For example, while Catherine de' Medici is often remembered as a powerful queen, it's usually her sons who are highlighted in historical accounts of her reign. Similarly, Blanche of Castile is remembered mostly as the mother of the saintly Louis IX, with little focus on her own political machinations. These queens' ability to rule behind the scenes suggests a level of cunning and intelligence that is often underestimated. Historians still debate whether these queens used their influence purely for personal gain or if their primary motivation was ensuring the success of their children and the stability of their realms. In any case, they were masters of navigating the complex political terrain of their time, and their stories reveal a side of medieval queenship that is often forgotten: the power to rule without ever taking the throne. Now that we've explored the subtle art of ruling behind closed doors, let's take a closer look at one of the most powerful and fascinating queens in medieval history, Eleanor of Aquitaine. Eleanor's story is one of passion, power, and ambition, qualities that defined much of her reign and have left historians debating her true motivations for centuries. She was a woman who didn't just accept the hand she was dealt. She reshaped the political landscape of her time through shrewd marriage alliances and an unyielding quest for control. Eleanor was born in 1122 into one of the most powerful and wealthy families in Europe. Her father was Duke William the Tex of Aquitaine, and her inheritance of Aquitaine's vast lands made her one of the richest women in Europe. From the moment she came of age, it was clear that Eleanor would be a force to reckon with. At the age of 15, she married King Louis VII of France, but their marriage was anything but a fairy tale. Louis was pious, indecisive, and weak, qualities that Eleanor quickly grew frustrated with. Despite her youth, Eleanor had an unshakable desire for power, and she was not the kind of woman who would quietly follow behind her husband. Eleanor's marriage to Louis ultimately became one of the defining moments of her life. After years of tension, she took the extraordinary step of having the marriage annulled in 1152. The reasons given were vague. There were arguments over the lack of an heir, and the fact that the marriage had been arranged for political reasons rather than out of any great affection. However, historians still debate whether Eleanor's real reason for ending the marriage was her growing dissatisfaction with Louis's weakness and her desire to carve out her own power. It wasn't long before she remarried again, this time to Henry Plantagenet, who would become Henry II of England. With this second marriage, Eleanor's influence expanded exponentially. When Henry ascended to the throne of England in 1154, Eleanor became the Queen Consort of England and ruler of the vast Aquitaine Duchy. But Eleanor didn't just settle into the role of a passive queen. She was not content to sit back and watch her husband rule. She had plans of her own. One of the most intriguing aspects of Eleanor's reign was her ability to influence both the French and English crowns. She controlled vast territories in both England and France, giving her a unique position of power. Her land holdings alone made her one of the most powerful women in Europe, and her ability to balance the interests of two rival kingdoms was nothing short of remarkable. However, it wasn't just Eleanor's political maneuvering that makes her story so fascinating. It was also her family's role in the dynastic drama. Eleanor had several children with Henry II, including two sons who would go on to become significant historical figures, Richard the Lionheart and John. But Eleanor's relationship with her sons was complex, and it would ultimately shape much of her legacy. Historians still debate whether Eleanor actively encouraged her sons to rebel against their father, Henry II, or if their desire for power was driven by their own ambitions. One of the most notable chapters of Eleanor's reign was her involvement in the rebellion known as the Revolt of the Princes. In 1173, Eleanor's sons, Richard, Henry and Geoffrey, rebelled against their father Henry II in an attempt to gain more power for themselves. While Eleanor's exact role in the rebellion remains unclear, it is widely believed that she played a key part in encouraging the revolt. Whether she was acting out of personal ambition, a desire for justice for her sons, or a mix of both is still a matter of debate. What is certain is that Eleanor's role as a mother who was willing to back her sons' rebellion against their father is an aspect of her life that has fascinated historians for centuries. Despite the revolt's failure and the ultimate reconciliation between Henry and his sons, Eleanor's political acumen and her willingness to take risks cannot be understated. She was a woman who understood the power of alliances and knew how to play the game of politics. Her role in the rebellion, while controversial, showed that she was not a passive figure in her marriage to Henry II. She was a partner in power. But even after the rebellion, Eleanor continued to exert her influence in both England and France. When Henry II died in 1189, Eleanor played a crucial role in securing Richard the Lionheart's position as King of England. She even acted as regent during Richard's absence on the Third Crusade, a time when England was in political turmoil. Eleanor's ability to navigate through these challenges, to maintain her position of power, and to secure the throne for her son is a testament to her political genius. What makes Eleanor's story particularly compelling is that she was not simply a pawn in a political game. She was an active player, shaping her destiny and the fate of the kingdoms she ruled. Historians still argue whether Eleanor's ambition was the driving force behind her actions or whether she was simply trying to secure her children's futures in a harsh and unpredictable world. Some argue that her decisions were made out of a genuine desire to protect her sons, while others believe she was driven by her own desire for power and glory. One of the most intriguing aspects of Eleanor's reign was her ability to manage the complex relationships between the different realms she controlled. As a queen consort of England, she had to navigate the volatile political landscape of medieval England, but her lands in Aquitaine made her just as powerful in France. She was a queen who straddled two worlds, constantly balancing the interests of both kingdoms. Her political prowess in this regard is still admired today, and her ability to control both England and Aquitaine from behind the scenes has made her one of the most celebrated queens in history. Ultimately, Eleanor's legacy is one of power, ambition, and family loyalty. She was a woman who knew how to use her position and her family's connections to shape the future of Europe. Her reign was marked by bold decisions, strategic alliances, and the kind of political intrigue that would make even the most seasoned diplomat envious. Whether you view her as a ruthless, power-hungry queen or a devoted mother fighting for her children's futures, one thing is clear. Eleanor of Aquitaine was a force to be reckoned with, and her impact on history continues to be felt to this day. As we continue on this journey through the lives of medieval queens, we turn our attention to another fascinating figure, Matilda of England, a woman whose struggle for the English throne not only shaped her personal legacy, but also marked a defining period in English history. Her story is one of determination, conflict, and fierce ambition, a battle for the crown that ultimately left an indelible mark on the concept of royal succession in England. Matilda was born in 1102, the daughter of King Henry III of England, and from an early age it was clear that she was being groomed for leadership. However, her path to power was never going to be smooth. After the sudden death of her only brother, William Adelin, in 1120, Matilda became the sole surviving heir to the English throne. This should have made her the automatic successor to her father's throne, but as we know, royal succession is never quite as straightforward as we might hope. The problem for Matilda was that, at the time, England was a deeply patriarchal society, and the idea of a woman ruling was far from popular. Even her father, Henry I, while initially supportive of her claim to the throne, could not prevent the challenges she would face. When Henry died in 1135, the throne was instead seized by Stephen of Blois, a nobleman who had been a cousin to Matilda and had been promised the throne in the event of her father's death. Stephen's actions were politically calculated, and they set the stage for a violent and bitter civil war known as the Anarchy, a period of nearly 2 decades of conflict over the English throne. Matilda, despite being well-educated, capable and the rightful heir, had to fight not only against Stephen's forces, but also against the deeply entrenched gender biases that made it difficult for a woman to rule. What followed was a remarkable series of political and military maneuvers by Matilda, who would stop at nothing to take the throne that was rightfully hers. Her struggle is one of the earliest examples in history where the idea of a female ruler was tested and challenged on the battlefield, and Matilda's reign, though short-lived, was pivotal in changing the course of English monarchy. One of the most memorable moments of her campaign occurred in 1141, when Matilda was captured by Stephen's forces. However, rather than being defeated, she managed to escape from her captors in one of the most daring escapes of the medieval period. Matilda's escape was not just a physical one, it was symbolic of her unyielding desire to regain the throne. This escape turned the tide of the conflict, and Matilda was able to gain substantial support from the English nobility, who were eager for a strong and decisive ruler. However, despite the numerous victories she secured in battle, Matilda's inability to gain control of London, a critical centre of power, eventually led to her undoing. Historians still debate why Matilda, who had every right to rule, failed to secure her place on the throne. Some suggest that her lack of a male heir hurt her claim, as the nobility was reluctant to accept a female monarch, even one with the lineage and capabilities that Matilda possessed. Others argue that Matilda's personality may have been a hindrance. She was reportedly stubborn, proud, and perhaps too ruthless in dealing with potential allies. The traditional view of women as passive and submissive in this era meant that Matilda's boldness and ambition were viewed as unacceptable by some. While Matilda did eventually win the support of many powerful nobles and even captured Stephen himself for a time, she never managed to fully solidify her reign. In 1148, Matilda was forced to abandon her claim to the throne after Stephen's death. However, her son, Henry, would eventually ascend to the throne as Henry II in 1154, bringing the Plantagenet dynasty to power. Historians argue that Matilda's efforts paved the way for Henry's eventual success, as her persistence in maintaining her claim and fighting for the throne demonstrated that the idea of a woman ruling was no longer entirely unimaginable. Through her actions, Matilda proved that royal succession, while traditionally male-dominated, could be challenged, and her legacy, though overshadowed by her son's reign, laid the groundwork for the future of English monarchy. Matilda's story also raises interesting questions about the role of women in medieval politics. Was her failure to secure the throne due to her gender alone, or were there other factors at play? Historians continue to debate these questions, as Matilda's reign was a flashpoint for the changing views of women in positions of power. Although Matilda never reigned as queen in her own right, her campaign for the throne showed that women could and did fight for political power in medieval Europe despite the obstacles they faced. Her struggle also sheds light on the complex relationship between monarchy and gender during this time period. In many ways, Matilda's story represents a turning point in the perception of women in medieval politics. While the idea of a female monarch was not fully accepted during Matilda's time, her efforts were a precursor to the future reigns of queens such as Elizabeth I and Victoria, who would prove that women could rule just as effectively, if not more so, than their male counterparts. Matilda's legacy is also linked to the political upheaval she left behind, which continued to shape England's royal succession for generations to come. The anarchy itself was a crucial turning point in the establishment of the English monarchy, and Matilda's role in it cannot be overstated. Although she never ruled as queen, she made a powerful statement about the ability of women to rule, and the idea that a monarch's legitimacy was based not only on gender, but also on their political and military ability. Her life is a powerful reminder that the struggle for power is not simply a matter of birthright, it is also a matter of will, ambition, and the ability to overcome obstacles. Matilda of England might not have become queen, but her tenacity and refusal to accept defeat in the face of overwhelming odds make her one of the most remarkable figures in medieval history. Now let's turn our attention to one of the most infamous and ambitious queens in medieval history, Isabella of France. Isabella's story is one of scandal, betrayal, and the pursuit of power, elements that make her reign one of the most intriguing in the annals of English monarchy. She wasn't just a queen consort, she was a woman who deftly manipulated the politics of her time to achieve her own ends, often at the expense of those who trusted her the most. Isabella was born in 1295, the daughter of King Philip IV of France, a monarch whose actions would reverberate across Europe. She married Edward II of England in 1308, in a political alliance meant to strengthen ties between France and England. On paper, this was a union that promised stability, but in reality it became a powder keg of political tensions and personal animosities. Edward II was, by many accounts, a weak and indecisive ruler, qualities that Isabella quickly grew frustrated with. He was also known for his close relationship with a group of favourites, most notably Piers Gaveston, which caused much resentment among the English nobility. This created the perfect conditions for Isabella's ambitions to come to the forefront. Despite being the queen consort, Isabella found herself relegated to the background as Edward became increasingly engrossed in his relationships with his favourites, leaving his wife to fend for herself in a court where political machinations were the norm. This sense of neglect and frustration would eventually drive Isabella to seek an alternative path to power, one that would lead her to betray her husband and become a key figure in one of the most dramatic political events of the time, the deposition of Edward II. In the early 1320s, Isabella's discontent with Edward reached a breaking point. She travelled to France in 1325 on a diplomatic mission, ostensibly to negotiate peace between England and France. However, while in France, Isabella struck up a close relationship with her brother, Charles IV of France, and began to formulate a plan to remove Edward from power. Historians still debate the extent of her role in the conspiracy to overthrow her husband, but what is clear is that Isabella began to see an opportunity to seize power for herself. She returned to England in 1326 with a small army and an alliance with Roger Mortimer, a powerful English nobleman who had been imprisoned by Edward II. Together, Isabella and Mortimer launched a rebellion against Edward II, culminating in the king's forced abdication in January 1327. Edward II was imprisoned and later murdered under mysterious circumstances, and Isabella's son, Edward III, was declared king. The image of Isabella, once the wronged wife, now standing as a powerful ruler in her own right, was a stunning shift in the balance of power. However, this rise to power was far from smooth, and it marked the beginning of a turbulent and controversial period in English history. While Isabella was now the mother of the king, her rule was not without challenges. For the next few years, Isabella and Mortimer effectively ruled England on behalf of her son. But Isabella's grip on power was shaky at best. Mortimer, who had been instrumental in Edward II's deposition, grew increasingly arrogant and overreaching, alienating other factions of the nobility. Isabella, ever the political tactician, began to distance herself from Mortimer, ultimately turning against him. In 1330, Edward III, now an adult, seized control of the throne from his mother and Mortimer, imprisoning Mortimer and having him executed for his treason. Isabella's reign as the de facto ruler of England was short-lived, but it was marked by incredible political manoeuvring. She was a queen who had the courage to challenge her husband, overthrow a king, and put her own son on the throne, all while navigating the treacherous waters of medieval politics. Historians still debate whether Isabella's actions were motivated purely by personal ambition or by a desire to protect her son and secure his future. Some see her as a power-hungry woman who used her son's claim to the throne as a means to gain control for herself, while others view her as a victim of her circumstances, a woman who was driven to act by the failure of her husband to fulfill his duties as king. Isabella's legacy is a complex one. On one hand, she is remembered as a woman who dared to defy the traditional expectations of queenship and acted decisively in the face of her husband's failings. On the other hand, her actions led to the violent and bloody deposition of Edward II, a controversial event that has coloured her reputation for centuries. Isabella's involvement in her husband's downfall and her eventual betrayal of Mortimer have led some to view her as a scheming and ruthless figure, yet her intelligence, political skill, and ability to maneuver in a male-dominated world cannot be denied. Historians still argue over whether Isabella's motives were purely personal or whether she was acting in the interest of the English crown. Was she a woman who sought power for its own sake, or was she a mother trying to secure her son's position in a kingdom on the brink of chaos? The truth is likely a combination of both. Isabella's actions were driven by personal ambition, but she was also undoubtedly motivated by a desire to see her son secure his rightful place on the throne. In the end, Isabella's reign serves as a reminder of the complex and often treacherous nature of medieval politics, especially for women in positions of power. She was a queen who navigated her way through a political minefield, using her intelligence and ambition to achieve her goals, and ultimately leaving a legacy that is still debated today. Isabella of France was, without a doubt, one of the most scandalous and politically savvy queens in history. She turned betrayal into an art form, and her actions continue to stir the imaginations of historians and the public alike. Her legacy is one of triumph and tragedy, as she rose to power through sheer will, only to see it slip away in the end. Whether seen as a villain or a victim, Isabella's life is a testament to the complexities of medieval queenship and the unpredictable nature of power. Now let's move to a queen whose reign is often defined by her political savvy, her manipulation of the court, and the subtle yet substantial way she shaped the destiny of Renaissance France, Catherine de' Medici. Often seen as a ruthless power player, Catherine's story is a fascinating exploration of how a woman can navigate and thrive in a political environment designed to favour men. Known for her intelligence, pragmatism, and undying ambition, Catherine's legacy is a mix of both admiration and fear. She was more than just a queen consort. She was a ruler in her own right, even though her reign was officially through her sons. Catherine de' Medici was born into one of Italy's most powerful families, the Medici, in 1519. Her early life was far from regal. She was orphaned at a young age when her parents died under mysterious circumstances, and she spent much of her youth in the Medici family's care. It wasn't until she was married off to Henry, Duke of Orléans, who would later become Henry II of France, that she rose to the heights of royal power. But Catherine's story didn't follow the traditional trajectory of a queen consort. She wasn't merely a decorative figure next to her king. She was a politically astute and calculating woman who would go on to wield immense influence in the French court. When Catherine's husband Henry II died unexpectedly in 1559, Catherine found herself in a precarious situation. Her sons, all young and inexperienced, were left to rule France, but the throne was essentially in her hands. As the regent, Catherine was left to navigate the turbulent waters of 16th-century French politics, a period marked by religious conflict, dynastic disputes, and political instability. The Catholic-Protestant wars in France, in particular, were threatening to tear the kingdom apart. Historians still debate whether Catherine's involvement in these religious conflicts was an attempt to preserve her power, or if she genuinely sought to stabilize France. One of Catherine's most famous and controversial acts as Queen Regent was her role in the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre of 1572, during which thousands of Huguenots, French Protestants, were killed in the streets of Paris. While historians still debate whether Catherine directly ordered the massacre, it is widely believed that she played a significant role in orchestrating the violence, viewing it as a way to rid the country of Protestant influence and maintain royal power. The event left an indelible stain on her reputation, and she was often blamed for the bloodshed, even though the true extent of her involvement remains unclear. Despite this dark chapter in her life, Catherine's reign is marked by some impressive achievements. She was an expert at managing the delicate balance of power at court, ensuring that her children, Charles IX, Henry III, and Francis II, retained their hold on the throne despite the many external threats to their rule. She was known for her ability to manipulate the French nobility, turning allies into enemies and enemies into allies, always ensuring that the crown maintained control. It's said that Catherine's political acumen was rivaled by few, and her ability to survive in a court filled with intrigue, betrayal, and constant shifting alliances is a testament to her sharp mind and unyielding ambition. But despite her successes, Catherine's legacy is often clouded by the darker aspects of her reign. Her attempts to control the political landscape often involved ruthless and manipulative tactics, and she was not afraid to eliminate those who stood in her way. Yet, it's important to recognize that Catherine wasn't simply a power-hungry queen. Her actions, while controversial, were often driven by a desire to preserve her family's rule and protect the future of her children. In the male-dominated world of 16th century France, Catherine had few options if she wanted to ensure the survival of her dynasty, and her ability to maneuver through the complexities of court politics was nothing short of impressive. Historians still debate whether Catherine was a villain or a victim of circumstance. Was she a ruthless queen who manipulated events for her own gain, or was she simply a mother fighting to protect her children in a kingdom rife with danger? It's clear that Catherine was both. She was ruthless when necessary, but she was also a queen who understood the complexities of power and the sacrifices it required. In many ways, Catherine de' Medici was ahead of her time, a woman who recognized that power wasn't just about the title you held, it was about the influence you could wield behind the scenes. Catherine's relationship with her sons, particularly her two most famous children, Charles IX and Henry III, was equally complex. Historians argue whether Catherine's political influence over them was driven by genuine maternal concern or a desire for power. Both of her sons were weak rulers, and Catherine often took the reins of power in their stead, making key decisions and ensuring that the monarchy was protected. In some ways, she was the true ruler of France, even though her sons held the official title of king. Some see Catherine's actions as a necessary step to protect the throne and stabilize the kingdom. Others argue that she was nothing more than a power-hungry woman who used her children as pawns in her own game of political chess. Despite her ambition, Catherine was a woman who ultimately struggled with her legacy. By the time of her death in 1589, Catherine's reputation had been tarnished by her involvement in the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre and her controversial reign as regent. However, in recent years, historians have begun to reassess her role in French history. While her reign was filled with political intrigue, assassination attempts, and religious strife, Catherine de' Medici was, at the end of the day, a woman who had no choice but to navigate the treacherous waters of medieval monarchy. Her ability to maintain power through sheer will and political savvy made her one of the most powerful women in European history. Her influence over the French court, her strategic marriages, and her manipulation of political alliances ensured that the Medici family remained a dominant force in France for generations. Though her methods were often ruthless and her reputation tarnished, there is no denying that Catherine de' Medici's reign changed the course of French history. Catherine was, in many ways, a queen who defied the odds. In a world dominated by powerful men, she rose to prominence not because of the crown she wore, but because of the power she wielded behind the scenes. Her legacy is one of both triumph and tragedy, a testament to the complex nature of political power in the medieval world. As we continue through the annals of medieval queenship, we encounter one of the most fascinating and enigmatic figures of the Byzantine Empire, Theodora of Byzantium. Born in humble circumstances, Theodora would rise to become one of the most powerful women in history, wielding authority and influence that few could rival. Her life story is one of transformation, from a young woman with few prospects to an empress whose reign would leave an indelible mark on history. Her journey is a tale of determination, political savvy, and the strength to overcome the odds, making her one of the most remarkable figures in medieval history. Theodora was born around 500 AD into a lower-class family, and her early life was anything but royal. Her father was a bear trainer for the Hippodrome in Constantinople, and her mother was a dancer and actress. Theodora's early years were marked by poverty and scandal, and she even worked as an actress in the public theatres, a profession that, in Byzantium, was associated with disreputable and immoral behaviour. The fact that Theodora managed to rise above these humble beginnings and eventually become empress is nothing short of extraordinary. In her youth, Theodora's life was filled with struggle, and she faced immense societal stigma because of her profession. Yet, her determination and intelligence shone through as she navigated the complexities of Byzantine society. It was during this time that she met Justinian, the future emperor of the Byzantine Empire, who was then a young man in search of a wife. Despite their differences in social standing, Justinian fell in love with Theodora, and their relationship would change the course of history. The couple married in 525 AD, and Theodora became empress consort. What followed was a remarkable transformation. Theodora's early life, filled with scandal and hardship, was now far behind her, and he was poised to influence the direction of the Byzantine Empire. However, her rise to power did not come easily, and her influence was often met with resistance from the nobility and the clergy, who looked down upon her humble origins. Despite this, Theodora quickly proved that her intellect, political acumen, and strong will made her a force to be reckoned with in the Byzantine court. Theodora's political savvy was evident in her handling of the Nika riots of 532 AD, one of the most significant events of her reign. The riots began as a revolt by chariot racing fans in Constantinople, but they quickly escalated into a full-scale rebellion against Emperor Justinian's rule. The situation grew dire as the rioters besieged the imperial palace and demanded the emperor's abdication. Justinian, who was initially ready to flee, was urged by Theodora to stay and fight. In one of the most famous speeches in history, Theodora declared that she would rather die than live in exile, and she convinced her husband to stand firm. With her support, Justinian was able to rally his forces and quash the rebellion, restoring his authority and solidifying Theodora's position as a key political figure. The aftermath of the Nika riots demonstrated Theodora's strength and her unwavering commitment to maintaining her power. Her leadership during the crisis earned her the respect of the Byzantine people and cemented her place as one of the most powerful women of the medieval era. It also marked the beginning of a long and fruitful partnership with Justinian, who relied on her judgment and advice in many matters of state. Theodora wasn't just a passive consort. She played an active role in the governance of the empire and made crucial decisions on matters ranging from legal reforms to the defense of the empire. One of Theodora's most lasting legacies was her work on behalf of women's rights. She enacted laws that aimed to improve the status of women in the Byzantine Empire, including reforms that restricted the sale of young girls into prostitution and provided women with more rights in marriage and divorce. These laws were groundbreaking for their time and reflected Theodora's deep commitment to protecting women from exploitation and abuse. She also took steps to curb the power of the clergy, whom she saw as a threat to her own political power, and advocated for a more progressive view of women's roles in Byzantine society. While her reforms were not universally accepted, they laid the groundwork for future advancements in the status of women in the Byzantine Empire. Despite her success, Theodora's reign was not without its controversies. She was accused of being ruthless in her pursuit of power, and some historians have suggested that she was involved in the suppression of rival factions within the court. She had a reputation for being politically calculating and unyielding in her efforts to consolidate power, and her enemies often saw her as manipulative and controlling. Her relationship with her husband Justinian, while one of the most successful and long-lasting in Byzantine history, was also the subject of scrutiny, with some believing that Theodora's influence over Justinian was excessive. However, it is important to recognize that Theodora was working in a deeply patriarchal society where her position as a woman in power was inherently precarious. She was forced to navigate the complexities of Byzantine politics, where the preservation of her influence required both strength and cunning. Theodora's ability to maintain her position in such a hostile environment speaks to her exceptional leadership and resilience. Theodora's death in 548 AD marked the end of an era for the Byzantine Empire. While she was mourned by many, her legacy lived on through the laws she enacted, the reforms she championed, and the strength with which she ruled. Her influence over Justinian's reign and the direction of the empire cannot be overstated. Despite her humble beginnings, Theodora rose to become one of the most powerful and respected women in history. Historians still debate whether Theodora's actions were driven by personal ambition, a desire for power, or a genuine commitment to the welfare of her empire. Some view her as a ruthless queen who did whatever it took to stay in power, while others see her as a woman who overcame tremendous odds to carve out a place for herself in a world that was not kind to women in positions of authority. What is clear is that Theodora's reign was one of remarkable influence and political acumen. She was a queen who understood the delicate balance of power, and she used her position to shape the future of the Byzantine Empire. In the end, Theodora's legacy is one of transformation, both personal and political. From her early years as a dancer and actress to her rise as Empress of Byzantium, her life proves that determination, intelligence, and the willingness to defy convention can change the course of history. Theodora remains a symbol of strength and resilience, a woman who defied the odds to become one of the most influential and remarkable rulers of the medieval world. Moving from the grand halls of Byzantium, we now turn to the heart of medieval Europe, where another remarkable and often underappreciated queen held immense power and influence, Agnes of Poitou. Unlike the grand, flashy personalities of some of her more famous contemporaries, Agnes's role in history was more subtle, but no less significant. As a queen who was never crowned in the traditional sense, Agnes wielded a quiet but potent influence over the course of medieval politics, particularly in the 12th century. Her story is a testament to the power that could be achieved without the need for a throne or a crown, and her political maneuvering and backroom dealings would leave a legacy that rippled through the generations. Agnes's life began in the early 12th century, born into the noble house of Poitou, a family with significant holdings in both France and Spain. Her marriage to Henry the Proud, Duke of Bavaria, initially positioned her within the influential circles of European nobility, though it was her subsequent marriage to Emperor Frederick II of the Holy Roman Empire that truly propelled her into the political spotlight. At the time of their marriage, Frederick was one of the most powerful figures in Europe, and his union with Agnes solidified her place in the imperial court. Despite her elevated status, Agnes was not one to rest on her laurels. She knew the value of her position and sought to use her influence wisely, especially when it came to securing her children's future. When Frederick passed away in 1250, Agnes, despite her official role as Empress Consort, continued to wield power through the politics of her children. But Agnes's reign wasn't based on military conquest or public displays of power. It was based on the subtle art of court politics and alliance building, an area where she excelled. Her legacy as a queenmaker, though rarely discussed in-stream historical accounts, cannot be overstated. One of Agnes's most significant political acts was securing the future of her son, the future Emperor Henry VI. Despite various political hurdles, including challenges from rival factions in the Holy Roman Empire, Agnes used her connections and influence to ensure that her son's claim to the throne was secure. Historians still argue about how much Agnes personally influenced these events, but it is clear that without her maneuvering, the political situation in Europe at the time could have unfolded very differently. Agnes's power, though immense, came not from public acclaim or royal displays, but from a network of alliances and careful diplomacy. She was one of the first medieval queens to understand the full potential of behind-the-scenes political strategy, something that would become a hallmark for future queens. Historians often note that while Agnes was not the most visible ruler, her actions helped shape the political landscape of her time, particularly in Central Europe. Her ability to act decisively and manipulate court factions demonstrated that power was not just about ruling from the throne, but also about shaping the course of history from the shadows. One of the most intriguing aspects of Agnes's rule was her relationship with the clergy. As Empress Consort, she wielded considerable influence over the church, using her position to secure favorable alliances with powerful religious figures. Some scholars suggest that her involvement with the church was a strategic move, enabling her to create a network of allies who could support her political aspirations. Others believe that Agnes genuinely sought to strengthen the role of the Church in medieval European politics, seeing it as a stabilizing force during an era of frequent conflict. In her later years, Agnes took on a role as the power behind the throne as her son, Henry VI, ascended to the throne, but her influence was not to last forever. After her son's reign, Agnes's name began to fade from the historical record, overshadowed by the more prominent figures of the time. However, her legacy lived on in the political system she helped shape, and in the way she demonstrated that a queen's power could extend far beyond her ceremonial role. In many ways, Agnes of Poitou laid the groundwork for the queens who would follow, including those who would rule with similar subtlety and cunning in the coming centuries. Agnes's story is one of quiet power, demonstrating that not all queens were destined for the limelight. Some, like Agnes, carved their places in history through diplomacy, intelligence, and a deep understanding of the mechanics of royal court politics. While she may not have been a queen who commanded armies or who ruled with a firm hand, Agnes's influence on the political landscape of Europe during the 12th century was undeniable. She understood the importance of strategic alliances and the value of securing her children's futures, and through her actions she set an example for future generations of royal women who would follow in her footsteps. Despite the many male-dominated narratives of medieval politics, Agnes of Poitou's story reminds us that women were capable of shaping the course of history just as powerfully as their male counterparts. Her story is proof that true power often lies not in the public eye, but in the quiet corridors of influence, and in Agnes's case, that power was wielded with incredible effect. The question of how much Agnes truly shaped the events of her time remains a topic of debate. Some historians argue that she was more of a figurehead, her actions motivated by the influence of others around her. Yet her ability to maintain her family's position and manipulate key players in the imperial court suggests a far more active and strategic role in shaping her son's future. While her name may not be as widely remembered as some of her contemporaries, the effects of her rule and her political maneuvering are still felt in the historical record. As we reflect on Agnes's life, we see that the role of queen in the medieval period was not always about the throne. It was often about influence, alliances, and the ability to outmaneuver rivals. Agnes of Poitou's quiet, strategic reign is an important reminder that the power of queens in the medieval era was often wielded with far more subtlety than we may initially assume. From the intricacies of imperial courts to the wild and unforgiving world of the Viking Age, let's now look at Lagertha, the legendary Norse warrior queen whose story has been immortalized in sagas and popular culture. Lagertha's tale, though shrouded in myth and folklore, provides a fascinating glimpse into the world of Viking women who defied gender norms and fought for honor, power, and survival. While her true historical existence is still debated, the legend of Lagertha has left a lasting impression on both history and modern storytelling, making her one of the most intriguing figures in medieval lore. Lagertha's life, as recounted in the saga of the Ragnarsons, places her at the heart of the action during one of the most turbulent and dramatic periods in Viking history. She is often depicted as a fierce shield maiden, a woman who took up arms alongside men in battle, proving that Norse women were far from the passive figures we often associate with medieval society. According to the saga, Lagertha was not only a skilled fighter, but also the first wife of the legendary Viking warrior Ragnar Lothbrok, one of the most famous figures in Viking lore. Together they are said to have fought in several battles, including the successful defense of Norway from an invading army. Lagertha's most famous contribution to the Viking world is her role in the defense of Norway. In the saga, it is said that when Ragnar was called to battle, he left behind Lagertha to protect their lands. In her own right, Lagertha proved to be an expert strategist and a formidable warrior. The saga describes her leading her forces in defense of her territory, and her bravery during the battle was celebrated far and wide. After this victory, Ragnar is said to have been so impressed by her skill and courage that he invited her to join him in a more prominent role in his future conquests. While this is historical accuracy of Lagertha's actions is hard to verify, her story is a testament to the remarkable role women could play in Viking society. Women like Lagertha were not confined to the domestic sphere, but were actively involved in their community's defense, leadership, and even military campaigns. The Vikings were a people who valued strength, courage, and cunning above all, and Lagertha's inclusion in their mythology reflects these qualities. While there may not be concrete evidence that Lagertha was an actual historical figure, the saga of her deeds illustrates the significant influence that women could wield, especially in societies where physical prowess was as highly regarded as political maneuvering. Lagertha's tale also demonstrates the power of myth in shaping the legacy of historical figures. Over time, the legend of Lagertha has evolved, with her role in Viking society becoming more romanticized and embellished. Today, she is perhaps most famous through her portrayal in the popular TV series Vikings, where her character is a fierce, skilled fighter and a crucial part of the show's central narrative. In this modern retelling, Lagertha's character has become a symbol of female strength, resilience, and leadership, resonating with audiences across the globe. Yet, as with many stories passed down through generations, the truth behind Lagertha's legend remains elusive. Historians still debate the extent of women's involvement in Viking warfare. Some argue that women like Lagertha were likely more mythological than real, as there is little hard evidence to suggest that Viking women regularly took part in battles. On the other hand, some historians suggest that the concept of the Shield Maiden may have had a basis in reality, albeit perhaps as a rare exception. Regardless of whether Lagertha existed as a singular historical figure, her legend serves as a powerful reminder of the untold stories of Viking women, figures whose contributions may have been overlooked in traditional accounts of history. The significance of Lagertha's story is also seen in the way it challenges traditional views of medieval women. In a world where women were typically expected to manage the household and bear children, Lagertha's warrior status subverts these expectations, presenting her as a symbol of feminine power and agency. Her legacy, even if only semi-historical, underscores the fact that women in the medieval world were not merely passive observers, they were active participants in the creation of history, whether on the battlefield or in the corridors of power. In addition to her role in battle, Lagertha's legend highlights the Viking attitude toward relationships and marriage. Though her relationship with Ragnar is central to her story, the saga also emphasizes her independence. According to the myth, after her initial marriage to Ragnar, Lagertha eventually parted ways with him as he became enamored with other women. Her decision to leave Ragnar is often interpreted as a sign of her strength and autonomy, reinforcing the notion that women in Viking society had the agency to shape their own destinies, particularly in the face of betrayal or hardship. Lagertha's mythological legacy also intertwines with broader themes of warrior culture in Viking society. The Vikings, as a people, placed great importance on honor, courage and valor, both in battle and in life. Lagertha, as a shield maiden, embodies these ideals. Her ability to fight for her land and defend her honor was celebrated in the sagas, positioning her as a role model for strength and independence. In a time when women were often relegated to secondary roles, Lagertha stands as a testament to the possibilities of female empowerment in a world dominated by men. Beyond the historical and mythological significance, Lagertha's legacy also speaks to the broader question of how women are remembered in history. In a perisaga, odd when male warriors and kings often dominated the narrative, Lagertha's inclusion in the sagas, whether as a historical figure or a creation of legend, offers a counter-narrative that highlights the often overlooked contributions of women. By reclaiming and celebrating figures like Lagertha, we are reminded that history is not only shaped by kings and emperors, but also by the women who fought, ruled, and influenced their worlds in ways that were often invisible but no less significant. Lagertha's story also has a lasting impact on how modern audiences view women in history. With the rise of modern television shows, books and movies, Lagertha has been transformed into a symbol of feminine strength and resilience, proving that even the oldest legends can be revitalized for new generations. Her tale continues to inspire women today, showing that the fight for power, honor, and equality is not a new struggle. It is one that women have fought for centuries. In conclusion, Lagertha's legend, whether rooted in history or myth, serves as an enduring symbol of the power that women could wield in medieval society. Her courage, independence, and strength make her one of the most iconic and fascinating figures in Viking lore. Though her historical existence remains uncertain, her impact on both medieval and modern interpretations of female power is undeniable. Shifting our focus from the warrior queens of the Vikings, we now turn to one of the most politically astute and influential queens of medieval Europe, Blanche of Castile. A queen consort and regent in 13th century France, Blanche is often remembered not for grand battles or dramatic wars, but for her shrewd political maneuvering, her ability to manipulate power structures, and her relentless devotion to her son, Louis IX of France. Her story is one of quiet power, maternal ambition, and a mastery of the art of diplomacy and governance that was far ahead of her time. Blanche was born in 1188, the daughter of King Alfonso VIII of Castile and Eleanor of England. Her marriage to Louis VIII of France in 1200 was part of a strategic alliance between the two kingdoms, and it marked the beginning of a politically advantageous partnership. Louis and Blanche had 3 children, with their son Louis IX, later Saint Louis, eventually ascending to the throne of France. However, it was Blanche's actions during the early years of Louis IX's reign that would leave the most lasting impact on both French history and the legacy of powerful medieval queens. In 1226, when Louis VIII passed away, his son Louis IX was only 12 years old, making Blanche the de facto ruler of France as regent. This transition could have led to instability, as many regencies did during the medieval period, especially when a young king was involved. However, Blanche proved to be not just a caretaker for her son, but a shrewd and capable ruler in her own right. Blanche's reign as regent is remembered as one of stability and consolidation, and she was instrumental in maintaining control over the kingdom while her son grew into a capable ruler. One of Blanche's most impressive feats was her ability to navigate the turbulent political landscape of 13th century France. At the time, the French nobility was divided, with many lords vying for power and control of their territories. Blanche faced constant challenges in keeping the peace and maintaining her son's claim to the throne. She quickly established herself as a formidable political operator, using diplomacy, strategic alliances, and even military force when necessary to ensure the stability of her regency. Historians still argue about how much power Blanche actually held during her regency and how much was due to her position as mother to the future king. However, it is clear that she was deeply involved in her son's upbringing and in the governance of the kingdom. She made crucial decisions that shaped France's future, including overseeing the extension of French territories and centralizing royal power. Her political acumen in managing the nobility, who were often rebellious and resistant to central authority, was exceptional. By the time Louis IX was old enough to rule on his own, Blanche had ensured that the monarchy was stronger and more unified than ever before. Blanche's maternal instincts were also a key part of her political strategy. She was fiercely protective of her son and saw his success as synonymous with the success of the kingdom. While many queens would have worked to establish their own power base, Blanche focused on ensuring that her son's reign would be a prosperous and stable one. She groomed Louis IX for kingship by involving him in state matters, teaching him the importance of justice, piety, and diplomacy. Historians often credit much of Louis IX's later success to the lessons he learned under his mother's guidance. However, Blanche's influence wasn't limited to the confines of the French court. Her diplomatic skills extended beyond the borders of France as she worked tirelessly to strengthen alliances with other European powers. One of her most notable diplomatic successes was her involvement in the negotiations with the English crown. In a time when England and France were often at odds, Blanche was able to create a temporary truce, easing tensions and ensuring a period of relative peace between the two kingdoms. This success in foreign diplomacy helped solidify her position as a key player on the European stage. Blanche's role as regent was not without its challenges, particularly when it came to managing the tensions between the French monarchy and the rebellious nobility. However, she showed a remarkable ability to balance these tensions, using both diplomacy and force when necessary. Her decisiveness and strength of character allowed her to maintain control over the kingdom during a period of potential chaos, and her reign is often viewed as a model of effective regency. One of the most enduring aspects of Blanche's legacy is her influence on the development of the French monarchy. Through her regency, Blanche set a precedent for strong, capable female leadership in times of crisis, proving that a queen could wield political power just as effectively as a king. She demonstrated that women could hold positions of power in a male-dominated world, using intelligence, strategy, and determination to secure their families' legacies. Her role in shaping the future of her son, Louis IX, who would go on to become one of France's most revered kings, cannot be overstated. St. Louis, as he came to be known, carried forward many of the values and lessons imparted to him by his mother, and his reign became one of the most celebrated in French history. In addition to her political achievements, Blanche was known for her personal piety and devotion to her faith. She was a devout Christian and worked to instill the same values in her son. Her dedication to the church and her support for religious institutions helped solidify the connection between the French monarchy and the Catholic Church, a relationship that would be crucial to the monarchy's legitimacy for centuries to come. She was also known for her charitable works and her support of the poor, further enhancing her reputation as a queen who was both politically capable and morally virtuous. Blanche's legacy extends far beyond her regency. She is often credited with laying the groundwork for the reign of Louis IX, one of France's greatest kings, and her role in consolidating royal power in France had a profound impact on the country's political development. Her combination of political savvy, maternal dedication, and personal piety set her apart as one of the most remarkable and influential queens of medieval Europe. In a time when women were often relegated to the sidelines of history, Blanche of Castile proves that queens could be more than mere figures of ceremony. She was a queen who shaped the course of history through her intellect, strength, and determination. While her name may not be as widely known as some of her contemporaries, her influence on French history is undeniable, and her legacy as a queen who ruled with both wisdom and grace continues to inspire generations of women in positions of power. However, Blanche's influence wasn't limited to the confines of the French court. Her diplomatic skills extended beyond the borders of France as she worked tirelessly to strengthen alliances with other European powers. One of her most notable diplomatic successes was her involvement in the negotiations with the English crown. In a time when England and France were often at odds, Blanche was able to create a temporary truce, easing tensions and ensuring a period of relative peace between the two kingdoms. This success in foreign diplomacy helped solidify her position as a key player on the European stage. Blanche's role as regent was not without its challenges, particularly when it came to managing the tensions between the French monarchy and the rebellious nobility. However, she showed a remarkable ability to balance these tensions, using both diplomacy and force when necessary. Her decisiveness and strength of character allowed her to maintain control over the kingdom during a period of potential chaos, and her reign is often viewed as a model of effective regency. One of the most enduring aspects of Blanche's legacy is her influence on the development of the French monarchy. Through her regency, Blanche set a precedent for strong, capable female leadership in times of crisis, proving that a queen could wield political power just as effectively as a king. She demonstrated that women could hold positions of power in a male-dominated world, using intelligence, strategy, and determination to secure their families' legacies. Her role in shaping the future of her son, Louis IX, who would go on to become one of France's most revered kings, cannot be overstated. St. Louis, as he came to be known, carried forward many of the values and lessons imparted to him by his mother, and his reign became one of the most celebrated in French history. In addition to her political Achievements: Blanche was known for her personal piety and devotion to her faith. She was a devout Christian and worked to instill the same values in her son. Her dedication to the church and her support for religious institutions helped solidify the connection between the French monarchy and the Catholic Church, a relationship that would be crucial to the monarchy's legitimacy for centuries to come. She was also known for her charitable works and her support of the poor, further enhancing her reputation as a queen who was both politically capable and morally virtuous. Blanche's legacy extends far beyond her regency. She is often credited with laying the groundwork for the reign of Louis IX, one of France's greatest kings, and her role in consolidating royal power in France had a profound impact on the country's political development. Her combination of political savvy, maternal dedication, and personal piety set her apart as one of the most remarkable and influential queens of medieval Europe. In a time when women were often relegated to the sidelines of history, Blanche of Castile proves that queens could be more than mere figures of ceremony. She was a queen who shaped the course of history through her intellect, strength, and determination. While her name may not be as widely known as some of her contemporaries, her influence on French history is undeniable, and her legacy as a queen who ruled with both wisdom and grace continues to inspire generations of women in positions of power. As we move from the political streets of France to the battlefields of medieval Britain, we encounter another queen whose life was marked by ambition, tragedy, and the constant struggle for control, Catherine of Aragon. Known to many as the first wife of King Henry VIII and the woman who stood as a symbol of royal dignity and resilience, Catherine's story is both heartbreaking and powerful. Her quest for legitimacy, her refusal to be cast aside, and her unyielding commitment to her beliefs have made her one of the most compelling queens in British history. Catherine was born in 1485 as the daughter of King Ferdinand II of Aragon and Queen Isabella I of Castile, two of the most powerful monarchs in Spain. From the moment she entered the world, her life was tied to the dynastic ambitions of her parents. Catherine's marriage to Henry VIII was arranged as part of a diplomatic alliance between Spain and England, cementing her place in the political machinations of the time. At the age of 16, Catherine married Henry's older brother, Prince Arthur, who died shortly after their marriage, leaving Catherine a widow. She later married Henry VIII in 1509, but the marriage would be fraught with tension, personal conflict, and the political ramifications of an heir that never came. Initially, Catherine was a beloved queen. She was known for her piety, her intelligence, and her grace. She worked tirelessly to support her husband's campaigns and was beloved by the people of England for her dedication to the welfare of the kingdom. Catherine was well-educated, fluent in several languages, and deeply devout. She played a central role in England's foreign policy and was often consulted on matters of state. However, as the years went by, her inability to produce a male heir for Henry VIII led to growing frustration within the English court. Historians still debate the causes of Catherine's failure to bear a surviving male child. Her first pregnancy resulted in the birth of a son, but the child died shortly after birth. Subsequent pregnancies resulted in stillbirths or the birth of daughters, including the future Queen Mary I. It was this lack of a male heir that ultimately led to the breakdown of Catherine's marriage to Henry, even though she had been a loyal and capable queen. As Henry became increasingly obsessed with securing a male heir, he began to look for ways to annul his marriage to Catherine, believing that God's punishment for his marriage to his brother's widow was the failure to produce a son. His desire for an annulment became a catalyst for one of the most significant political and religious upheavals in English history. Catherine's refusal to give up her position as queen, even when faced with the pressures of an annulment, was a testament to her character. She believed that her marriage to Henry was legitimate, despite the growing pressure from Henry and his supporters to annul the union. She held steadfast to her position, arguing that their marriage had been blessed by God and that she was the rightful queen. Catherine's steadfastness in the face of Henry's demands for divorce made her one of the most dignified and tragic figures in English royal history. Rather than acquiescing to her husband's wishes, she chose to stand by her marriage vows and maintain her status as queen, even when it meant being cast aside by her husband. Despite her eventual removal from the throne, Catherine's legacy continued to shape English history. Her refusal to be cast aside gave rise to the English Reformation, a split from the Catholic Church that would forever change the landscape of Europe. When Henry VIII sought an annulment from the Pope, he was refused, which led to his decision to break from Rome and establish the Church of England. Catherine's personal struggle was thus directly linked to one of the most significant religious and political shifts in the history of the Western world. Her persistence in the face of adversity ultimately led to the rise of Protestantism in England and the establishment of royal supremacy over religious authority. Even after her divorce from Henry VIII in 1533, Catherine's life was far from over. She was exiled from court and forced to live in relative obscurity, but she maintained her dignity and her resolve. She continued to support her daughter, Mary, who would later become queen, and she lived out her final years in peace, passing away in 1536. Her death marked the end of a turbulent chapter in English history, but her impact on the monarchy, the church, and the future of her daughter's reign was immeasurable. The story of Catherine of Aragon is often told as a tragic tale of a queen betrayed by her husband, but it is also a story of resilience, strength, and moral conviction. Catherine's refusal to accept an annulment, her dedication to her faith, and her unwavering belief in the legitimacy of her marriage to Henry VIII make her one of the most remarkable queens in medieval history. Her legacy lives on not just in her daughter, Mary I, but in the course of English history itself. Without Catherine's refusal to accept her fate, the political and religious landscape of England would have been radically different. Historians still debate whether Catherine's actions were motivated solely by a desire to retain her position as queen, or whether she was driven by a deeper moral and religious conviction. Some view her as a victim of Henry's lust and ambition, while others argue that she was a powerful woman who took control of her own destiny in a world where women were often powerless. In either case, Catherine's legacy as a queen who stood her ground, even in the face of overwhelming opposition, is undeniable. In the end, Catherine of Aragon's story is not just the story of a woman who refused to be sidelined. It is the story of a queen who shaped the course of English history, despite being relegated to the margins of power. Her legacy endures as a testament to the strength of women in the face of adversity, and her unwavering commitment to her beliefs is a reminder of the power of conviction in shaping the world. Now that we've explored the stories of queens who fought for their power, let's delve into the life of one of the most iconic, controversial, and tragic queens in history, Anne Boleyn. Anne's life and eventual downfall at the hands of her husband, Henry VIII, has been the subject of much fascination for centuries. Known primarily as the second wife of Henry VIII and the mother of Queen Elizabeth I, Anne's story is one of love, ambition, betrayal, and political intrigue, making her one of the most compelling figures in medieval history. Her journey from a noblewoman at the English court to the Queen of England is a story that shaped not only the future of England, but also the fate of the Church in the West. Anne was born around 1501 to a prominent family. Her early years were spent at the courts of the Netherlands and France, where she learned the finer points of diplomacy, etiquette, and courtly life. Upon returning to England, she caught the eye of Henry VIII, who at the time was desperate for a male heir. His first wife, Catherine of Aragon, had failed to produce a son, and Henry was increasingly frustrated with his marriage. Anne, who was young, vibrant and ambitious, captured Henry's attention and became the object of his obsession. Historians still debate whether it was love, lust or ambition that drove Henry to pursue Anne so relentlessly, but what is clear is that Anne's charm, intellect and beauty made her the centre of Henry's world. Anne's relationship with Henry was anything but conventional. At a time when royal marriages were seen as essential tools for political alliances, Henry's desire to marry Anne set off a chain of events that would change the course of history. Anne's refusal to become Henry's mistress and her insistence on marriage as a precondition for her surrender to him was revolutionary for the time. The king's infatuation with her led to his break with the Roman Catholic Church, as the Pope refused to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon. In a move that sent shockwaves through Europe, Henry established the Church of England, severing ties with the papacy, and in 1533 Anne and Henry were married. Anne's rise to the throne, however, was marked by increasing political and personal turbulence. Her coronation as queen was spectacular, but the reality of her position was far from secure. Anne gave birth to a daughter, Elizabeth, but Henry's hopes for a male heir were dashed again. She suffered multiple miscarriages, which severely damaged her position at court. In an age when the birth of a male heir was the defining characteristic of a successful queen, Anne's failure to provide one made her vulnerable in a way that few other queens were. The political factions at court were quick to turn against her, and many began to question her ability to fulfill her role as queen. Anne's relationship with Henry also began to deteriorate. Henry's attention shifted to Jane Seymour, a lady-in-waiting at court, and rumours of Anne's infidelity began to circulate. The political and personal pressures on Anne mounted, and she found herself isolated, surrounded by enemies both in court and in the church. Her fall from grace was rapid. In 1536, she was arrested on charges of adultery, treason and incest, charges that were almost certainly fabricated in order to remove her from the throne and allow Henry to marry Jane Seymour. After a trial that was little more than a formality, Anne was found guilty and executed by beheading. Anne's execution was one of the most controversial and dramatic moments in English history. It marked the end of a turbulent and short reign for a queen who had once held the promise of a bright future. The way in which she was treated by Henry and the English court is still debated by historians. Was Anne truly guilty of the crimes she was accused of, or was she the victim of a politically motivated conspiracy designed to eliminate her? Some historians argue that Anne's downfall was inevitable given the dynastic pressures of the time, while others suggest that she was the victim of a king's fickle desires and the machinations of his courtiers. Despite her tragic end, Anne's legacy is undeniable. Her daughter, Elizabeth, would go on to become one of the most successful and influential monarchs in history. Elizabeth's reign, known as the Elizabethan era, was marked by cultural flourishing, military success, and the consolidation of Protestantism in England. It's often said that Anne Boleyn's bloodline through her daughter helped to shape the future of England in profound ways. Elizabeth's success was, in many ways, a vindication of Anne's vision for the monarchy, even if Anne did not live to see it. Anne's legacy also extends to the religious changes she helped bring about. While Anne herself was never fully accepted by the Catholic Church, she was a key figure in the Protestant Reformation in England. Her marriage to Henry and the subsequent break with Rome were pivotal in the establishment of the Church of England. Anne was an avid supporter of the Reformation, and her influence on Henry's religious policies cannot be underestimated. While she did not live to see the full realization of the religious changes she championed, her role in them helped shape the religious landscape of England for centuries. Even though Anne's life was marked by personal and political tragedy, her story is one of incredible resilience and ambition. She rose from relative obscurity to become Queen of England, and despite the many forces working against her, she never lost sight of her own agency and her vision for the future. Her refusal to give in to Henry's demands for a mistress and her insistence on marriage as the price for her affections challenged the norms of her time. In a way, Anne's story is the story of a woman who dared to defy the system, even when that defiance led to her undoing. Anne's execution has become a symbol of the dangers of power and ambition in a world where women were often reduced to the roles of consorts and mothers. Her rise and fall at the English court is a reminder of how fragile a queen's power could be and how quickly the political tides could turn. Yet, despite her tragic end, Anne's legacy is a testament to the power of ambition, resilience, and the profound impact that one woman can have on history. Though she was ultimately outlived by her daughter, Anne Boleyn's place in history is secure as one of the most fascinating and complex queens of medieval Europe. As we move through the complex lives of medieval queens, one figure stands out for her remarkable courage, defiance, and passion for justice: Joan of Arc. Though her reign was short-lived, her impact on history is profound. Known as a saint by the Catholic Church and a symbol of resistance, Joan's life is marked by one of the most remarkable stories of faith, military leadership, and martyrdom in medieval Europe. Her journey from a simple peasant girl to the leader of the French army is a testament to the extraordinary power of belief and the force of will in the face of overwhelming odds. Joan was born around 1412 in Domremy, a small village in northeastern France, during the tumultuous years of the 100 Years' War between France and England. Raised in a deeply religious family, Joan's early life was marked by modesty and a strong sense of faith. However, at the age of 13, Joan began experiencing visions and hearing voices that she believed were divine in origin. The voices, which she identified as the saints Michael, Catherine, and Margaret, instructed her to help Charles VII, the Dauphin of France, reclaim his throne from the English invaders. These visions would guide Joan's actions throughout her life and lead her on a journey that would change the course of French history. At the time, France was in a state of political turmoil. The English had captured much of French territory, and the Dauphin's claim to the throne was under threat. Joan, despite her lack of military experience, convinced Charles VII to allow her to lead an army to relieve the besieged city of Orléans, a key French stronghold. Her charisma, conviction, and belief in her divine mission led to widespread support, and in 1429 she was given command of a French army. Joan's military leadership was extraordinary. She inspired the troops with her unwavering belief in God's will and her presence. He on the battlefield gave the French forces a much-needed boost in morale. Her first major success came in April 1429 when she led the French army to a dramatic victory at Orléans, breaking the English siege and shifting the momentum of the war in France's favour. The victory at Orléans was a turning point in the 100 Years' War, and it led to the coronation of Charles VII as King of France in Reims, a symbolic victory for Joan's mission and the French cause. Joan's role in the French military, though groundbreaking, was controversial. At the time, the idea of a woman leading an army was unheard of, and many were skeptical of Joan's abilities. However, her success on the battlefield silenced her critics, and she quickly became a symbol of French hope and unity. Her bravery, leadership, and ability to inspire those around her earned her a place in the annals of military history. Yet despite her successes, Joan's fate was far from certain. In 1430, Joan was captured by the Burgundians, allies of the English, during a military campaign. She was handed over to the English, who saw her not as a warrior, but as a heretic and a threat to their control over France. The English, eager to break the spirit of the French resistance, put Joan on trial for charges of heresy, witchcraft, and cross-dressing. She wore male military attire as part of her role as a soldier. The trial, conducted by church officials loyal to the English crown, was a sham. Joan was subjected to grueling interrogation and was ultimately found guilty of heresy. On May 30th, 1431, she was burned at the stake in Rouen, France, at the age of 19. Joan's death was not the end of her story. Within 25 years of her execution, a posthumous retrial was held, during which she was cleared of all charges and declared innocent. In 1920, she was canonized as a saint by the Catholic Church. Today, Joan of Arc is remembered as a martyr, a warrior, and a national heroine of France. Her legacy as a symbol of courage, faith, and resistance to oppression continues to inspire people around the world. Joan's life and death raise important questions about gender, power, and the role of women in medieval society. As a woman in a time when women were often relegated to domestic roles, Joan defied the social and cultural norms of her era. She did not just lead troops on the battlefield, she also challenged the authority of the English crown and the Catholic Church, institutions that were predominantly male-dominated. Her story is a powerful reminder of how women, even in the most oppressive and patriarchal societies, have found ways to assert their power and make a lasting impact on history. Her story also highlights the ways in which women in medieval Europe navigated the intersection of faith and politics. Joan's actions were not just motivated by personal ambition or a desire for power. They were driven by a deeply held religious belief that she was fulfilling a divine mission. Her faith gave her the strength to confront the forces of the English, even when they were armed with far greater military might. Joan's belief in her mission and in God's will became a source of power that transcended the traditional roles available to women at the time. Yet, despite her accomplishments, Joan's life ended in tragedy. She was condemned not just by her enemies, but also by the church and society, which saw her as a threat to the established order. Joan's death at such a young age is a tragic reminder of how the strength and agency of women were often suppressed in medieval society. Nevertheless, her legacy as a warrior queen, a saint, and a symbol of resistance endures, and she continues to inspire countless people, especially women who fight for justice, equality, and the right to lead. Joan of Arc's story is one of incredible triumph and devastating loss. Her brief life, though marked by challenges and eventual martyrdom, left a lasting mark on both French history and the world. She embodies the power of belief and the transformative role that individuals, especially women, can play in shaping the course of history. Joan's resilience, courage, and faith in her mission are timeless qualities that continue to inspire and resonate long after her death. Let's now move from the battlefield to the royal courts of Madagascar, where we encounter one of the most infamous and mad monarchs in history, Queen Ranavalona of Madagascar. Known as the Mad Queen in Western histories, Ranavalona's reign was a period of extreme measures, fierce resistance, and unparalleled cruelty that transformed the island's culture, politics, and relationship with the outside world. Her rule, which spanned from 1828 to 1861, remains one of the most controversial in the history of monarchy, both due to her efforts to maintain Madagascar's independence and the brutal methods she employed to achieve it. Ranavalona. I was born in 1778 into the Marina royal family, in a period when Madagascar was divided into numerous kingdoms. Her rise to the throne came under tumultuous circumstances, and her ascension marked the beginning of an era of resistance against foreign influence. She married King Radama I, the ruler of the Marina Kingdom, who prior to his death had begun to introduce some reforms and allowed foreign traders, especially the British and French, to establish footholds on the island. Radama's reign was characterized by the attempt to modernize the kingdom, and he even sought European advisors to help develop the country. However, upon his death in 1828, Ranavalona's policies took a dramatic turn. Where Radama had sought to open Madagascar to the outside world, Ranavalona sought to preserve the island's independence and protect its people from foreign interference. Her resistance to colonial powers would set her apart as a queen fiercely devoted to the sovereignty of Madagascar. Yet her methods were harsh, extreme, and deeply oppressive. Historians have debated whether her actions were justified by her desire to safeguard her kingdom, or if they were a product of paranoia and cruelty. One of the key elements of Ranavalona's reign was her opposition to Christianity, which had been introduced to the island by missionaries during her husband's reign. Where Radamer had welcomed Christian missionaries into his court, Ranavalona saw them as a direct threat to the power of the monarchy and the traditional religion of Madagascar. She viewed Christianity as a foreign influence that could destabilize her kingdom. In 1835, Ranavalona took drastic steps to suppress the growing Christian presence by ordering the mass execution of missionaries and Malagasy converts. She instituted a violent campaign to eliminate the faith, which included public executions, the destruction of Christian churches, and the exile of missionaries. Her repression of Christianity is one of the darkest chapters of her reign. Ranavalona's rule also became infamous for her brutal treatment of her subjects. She enforced harsh labor laws, including forcing thousands of Malagasy people to work on royal construction projects or as slaves in the military. She was known to send anyone suspected of disloyalty or of opposing her rule into labor camps, where they often died from exhaustion or disease. Historians have recorded her reign as one in which fear, violence, and paranoia were constant companions. Her security measures, including the widespread use of spies and secret police, ensured that dissent was suppressed and that her reign remained uncontested, though it was built upon a foundation of terror. One of the most horrific aspects of Ranavalona's reign was her use of trial by ordeal, a method in which individuals accused of treason were forced to undergo life-threatening tests. Some of the most infamous trials involved throwing accused traitors into a pit of venomous snakes or forcing them to walk over hot coals. These trials were often fatal, and Ranavalona used them to instill fear in her people and ensure their obedience. The cruelty of these trials has made her a figure of both fear and fascination in the history of monarchy. Ranavalona's reign also marked the beginning of Madagascar's resistance to colonialism, particularly to the growing influence of the French. Although France had been active in the Indian Ocean for centuries, it was during Ranavalona's rule that the French began to see Madagascar as a target for colonization. Ranavalona, aware of the threat posed by the French, took measures to isolate Madagascar from foreign powers. She restricted trade with European nations and expelled French representatives, further inflaming tensions with the French government. Her determination to keep Madagascar independent would lead to repeated conflicts with the French, who viewed her as a barrier to their imperial ambitions. Despite her extreme methods, Ranavalona once is considered by some to be a symbol of Malagasy resistance. Her fierce determination to keep Madagascar independent of colonial powers was certainly a defining characteristic of her reign. She actively resisted European imperialism, and under her leadership, Madagascar remained a sovereign kingdom, uncolonized by Western powers throughout her lifetime. In this regard, her legacy as a protector of her kingdom's independence is often highlighted, though it is tempered by the cruelty with which she achieved her goals. In the end, Ranavalona legacy is one of contradiction. On one hand, she was a fierce and determined monarch who stood as a barrier against the colonial forces of Europe, and on the other hand, she ruled through methods that were violent, oppressive, and highly authoritarian. Her legacy is heavily debated among historians. Some see her as a visionary queen who stood firm in the face of European colonialism, while others see her as a tyrant whose cruelty left a lasting scar on Madagascar. What is undeniable, however, is that her reign significantly shaped the future of Madagascar, and her influence as a leader continues to resonate in the island's history today. Ranavallona's rule eventually came to an end with her death in 1861. After her passing, her son, Radama II, succeeded her, and under his rule, Madagascar began to open up to more foreign influence, particularly from France. However, the legacy of Ranavallona's fiercely independent reign and her commitment to preserving her nation's sovereignty lived on in the memories of the Malagasy people. The island's resistance to colonialism, inspired in part by her defiance, would continue to shape its history in the years to come. In the broader context of medieval queenship, Ranavallona's reign is one of the most extreme examples of how a queen could wield power, and how that power could be both a tool of resistance and oppression. Her reign reminds us that the history of female monarchs is often complex, and that the legacy of their rule is never one-dimensional. Whether seen as a protector of independence or a tyrant, Ranavallona's reign remains a testament to the force of will, the ability to resist foreign dominance, and the terrible consequences of unchecked power. As we leave behind the stark landscape of Madagascar, let's travel to the lush, tumultuous courts of Scotland in the 16th century and focus on another queen whose life was marked by both tragedy and intrigue, Mary, Queen of Scots. The story of Mary Stuart is one of the most tragic in history, filled with passion, power struggles, betrayal, and a relentless pursuit of survival in a world where women were often pawns in the political games of men. From her ascent to the throne of Scotland as a young girl to her tragic end in England, Mary's life is a complex tale of love, loss, ambition, and political scheming that reverberated across Europe. Mary Stuart was born in 1542 to King James V of Scotland and his French wife, Mary of Guise. At the time of her birth, her father's death left her an infant queen, making her the sovereign of Scotland at just 6 days old. The infant queen's status immediately made her a figure of enormous political importance, as various factions in Scotland and beyond scrambled to control her future. The power dynamics surrounding Mary were often dictated by external forces, as powerful noble families in Scotland vied for influence, while England, France, and Spain saw her as a pawn in their own geopolitical struggles. Mary's early life was dominated by her childhood in France, where she was sent to be raised at the French court. At just 5 years old, she was betrothed to the future French king, Francis II, and raised alongside him in a highly protected and lavish environment. When she married Francis in 1558, she briefly became Queen Consort of France. However, Francis's premature death in 1560 left Mary widowed and without a king by her side. At the age of 18, she returned to Scotland, now ready to claim her position as queen in her homeland. Her return to Scotland marked the beginning of a reign fraught with political intrigue. Scotland was as deeply divided between Protestant and Catholic factions, and Mary, a Catholic queen in a country moving toward Protestantism, found herself in a perilous situation. Her attempts to maintain a balance between her Catholic faith and the growing Protestant movement in Scotland were continually challenged by the Protestant nobility, who grew increasingly hostile toward her. While Mary had the loyalty of some, she also faced significant opposition from her nobles, who saw her reign as a threat to their own power. One of the most significant moments of Mary's reign was her marriage to Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley, in 1565. The union initially seemed politically advantageous, as both Mary and Darnley had claims to the English throne through their Tudor and Stuart lines. However, this marriage quickly soured. Darnley, who was once charming, soon became a jealous and ambitious figure. His relationship with Mary deteriorated, and he became involved in a plot to murder her close confidant, David Rizzio. In 1566, Darnley's behaviour became increasingly erratic, and he was ultimately murdered in a mysterious explosion in 1566, an event that would set the stage for the downfall of Mary's reign. Following Darnley's death, Mary was left vulnerable, and her next marriage to the Earl of Bothwell, a man who was widely believed to have been involved in Darnley's murder, further alienated her from the Scottish nobility. The controversial nature of this marriage led to widespread rebellion, and Mary was forced to abdicate the Scottish throne in 1567 in favour of her infant son, James VI. Although Mary had hoped to regain her throne, her time in Scotland was over, and she fled to England to seek the protection of her cousin, Queen Elizabeth I. But Mary's arrival in England would lead to her ultimate undoing. Elizabeth, a Protestant queen, viewed Mary as a threat to her own throne, as many Catholics saw Mary as the legitimate Queen of England. The English court became embroiled in the question of whether to support Mary's claim or eliminate her as a rival. Mary, who had long been a Catholic figurehead in Europe, found herself trapped in England, a prisoner in a foreign court. Elizabeth hesitated to execute Mary, as the implications for Catholicism in Europe were enormous. But in 1586, following the discovery of the Babington Plot, a Catholic conspiracy to assassinate Elizabeth and place Mary on the English throne, Mary was tried for treason. Mary's trial and execution in 1587 are among the most dramatic episodes in the history of British monarchy. Despite her tragic fate, Mary faced her execution with remarkable composure, and her death marked the end of the era of the Catholic threat to the English throne. Her execution, while politically motivated, sealed her legacy as a martyr to Catholics and a symbol of resistance. Her son, James VI of Scotland, would go on to unite the crowns of England and Scotland in 1603, becoming James I of England, thus fulfilling the Stuart dynasty's claim to both thrones. Mary's life was filled with love, betrayal, political scheming, and profound tragedy. Her reign and her relationships were shaped by the competing forces of religious, political, and dynastic ambition, which ultimately led to her downfall. Her reign was short-lived and deeply troubled, but her story remains one of the most captivating and tragic in the history of European monarchy. Her tragic death gave rise to one of the most successful reigns in British history. Her son's eventual unification of England and Scotland set the stage for the Stuart dynasty's rule over both nations. Mary's legacy is complicated, with varying interpretations depending on one's perspective. Some view her as a victim of the political machinations of her time, a queen who was outmaneuvered by her enemies and betrayed by those closest to her. Others view her as a woman who failed to secure her throne because of poor political decisions and a series of ill-advised marriages. But what is undeniable is that Mary, Queen of Scots, left an indelible mark on history. Her tumultuous reign, marked by passion, political intrigue, and unrelenting ambition, serves as a powerful reminder of how women, despite facing immense challenges, could wield power, change the course of history, and leave a legacy that endures for centuries. In a broader historical context, Mary's life illustrates the complex relationship between monarchy, gender, and politics in medieval Europe. Her role as queen was shaped by the relentless demands of succession, religion, and international power struggles, and her story reveals the precarious nature of power for female rulers in a male-dominated world. Mary's struggles with her own personal desires and political ambitions are part of the larger narrative of medieval queenship. Women who fought, loved, and ultimately had to navigate a world that often seemed determined to limit their power. From the turbulent political landscape of Scotland, we now travel to one of the most powerful and enduring queens of medieval Italy, Margaret of Anjou. The queen consort of Henry VI of England, Margaret's life was one of fierce ambition, unyielding loyalty, and strategic power struggles. Her journey from a young princess to the central figure in the Wars of the Roses is a tale of resilience, family loyalty, and a relentless drive to protect her son's birthright. Margaret's story stands as a powerful reminder of the pivotal role that queens played in medieval political intrigue, as well as the lengths they would go to preserve their dynasties. Born in 1430, Margaret was the daughter of René of Anjou, a French nobleman and former king of Naples, and Isabel of Lorraine. From the beginning, her life was intertwined with European power struggles, as her family's political ambitions stretched across France, Italy, and England. Margaret's marriage to Henry VI of England in 1445 was a strategic alliance meant to secure peace between England and France. However, the marriage would soon become one of the most complex and politically charged unions in English history. When Margaret arrived in England as Henry's bride, the country was already in a period of deep political turmoil. Henry VI's reign was marred by periods of mental instability, which rendered him an ineffective ruler. This left a vacuum of power at the English court, and Margaret, with her strong sense of duty and political acumen, quickly assumed a dominant role. At first, she was content to be a supportive consort, but as Henry's mental state deteriorated, Margaret increasingly became the political leader of the Lancastrian faction, determined to preserve her husband's reign and the future of her son, Edward of Westminster. Margaret's involvement in the Wars of the Roses, a series of civil wars between the Lancastrian and Yorkist factions for control of the English throne, cemented her as a formidable political figure. She was not just a passive queen consort, but a fierce advocate for her family's survival and an astute strategist. When Henry VI fell ill in the early 1450s, Margaret took charge of the Lancastrian cause, effectively leading the army against the Yorkists. She proved herself as capable in the political and military spheres as any of her male counterparts, guiding the Lancastrian forces through battles and political maneuvering with remarkable determination. Despite her efforts, Margaret's path to securing the throne for her son was fraught with failure and personal loss. In 1461, the Yorkist forces, led by Edward IV, defeated the Lancastrians at the Battle of Towton, one of the largest and bloodiest battles of the Wars of the Roses. The defeat was a significant blow to Margaret's cause, but she refused to give up. Margaret's resilience shone through as she continued to rally support for the Lancastrians, even after the loss of several key battles. She remained loyal to her husband, Henry VI, and dedicated her efforts to securing the crown for her son, Edward. From the turbulent political landscape of Scotland, we now travel to one of the most powerful and enduring queens of medieval Italy, Margaret of Anjou. The queen consort of Henry VI of England, Margaret's life was one of fierce ambition, unyielding loyalty, and strategic power struggles. Her journey from a young princess to the central figure in the Wars of the Roses is a tale of resilience, family loyalty, and a relentless drive to protect her son's birthright. Margaret's story stands as a powerful reminder of the pivotal role that queens played in medieval political intrigue, as well as the lengths they would go to preserve their dynasties. Born in 1430, Margaret was the daughter of René of Anjou, a French nobleman and former king of Naples, and Isabel of Lorraine. From the beginning, her life was intertwined with European power struggles, as her family's political ambitions stretched across France, Italy, and England. Margaret's marriage to Henry VI of England in 1445 was a strategic alliance meant to secure peace between England and France. However, the marriage would soon become one of the most complex and politically charged unions in English history. When Margaret arrived in England as Henry's bride, the country was already in a period of deep political turmoil. Henry VI's reign was marred by periods of mental instability, which rendered him an ineffective ruler. This left a vacuum of power at the English court, and Margaret, with her strong sense of duty and political acumen, quickly assumed a dominant role. At first, she was content to be a supportive consort, but as Henry's mental state deteriorated, Margaret increasingly became the political leader of the Lancastrian faction, determined to preserve her husband's reign and the future of her son, Edward of Westminster. Margaret's involvement in the Wars of the Roses, a series of civil wars between the Lancastrian and Yorkist factions for control of the English throne, cemented her as a formidable political figure. She was not just a passive queen consort, but a fierce advocate for her family's survival and an astute strategist. When Henry VI fell ill in the early 1450s, Margaret took charge of the Lancastrian cause, effectively leading the army against the Yorkists. She proved herself as capable in the political and military spheres as any of her male counterparts, guiding the Lancastrian forces through battles and political maneuvering with remarkable determination. Despite her efforts, Margaret's path to securing the throne for her son was fraught with failure and personal loss. In 1461, the Yorkist forces, led by Edward IV, defeated the Lancastrians at the Battle of Towton, one of the largest and bloodiest battles of the Wars of the Roses. The defeat was a significant blow to Margaret's cause, but she refused to give up. Margaret's resilience shone through as she continued to rally support for the Lancastrians, even after the loss of several key battles. She remained loyal to her husband, Henry VI, and dedicated her efforts to securing the crown for her son, Edward. Moving from the political labyrinths of medieval England, we now turn to a queen whose brief and tragic reign continues to spark debate and fascination, Lady Jane Grey, the 9 Days Queen. Often remembered for the brevity of her reign and the confusion surrounding her ascent to the throne, Lady Jane's story encapsulates the volatile nature of royal politics during the Tudor period. Her life serves as both a cautionary tale about the dangers of power struggles and a reminder of how the ambitions of others can dramatically alter the course of history, especially for young women thrust into political turmoil. Born in 1537 to the Duke of Suffolk and Frances Brandon, Lady Jane Grey was a great-granddaughter of Henry VII of England, making her a legitimate claimant to the English throne. Raised in a devout Protestant household and highly educated, Jane was a remarkable young woman, known for her intelligence, piety, and gentle demeanour. She was not a product of any grand political ambition on her part, at least not initially. However, her royal bloodline and strong Protestant affiliations would soon place her at the centre of one of the most tragic episodes of English history. In 1553, following the death of King Henry VIII's son, Edward VI, the throne of England was left to a childless monarch. Edward VI, who had been groomed to be a Protestant king, died young, and his death created a power vacuum. The question of who would succeed him sparked a bitter battle between Catholic and Protestant factions. Edward's will named Lady Jane Grey as his successor, largely because of her Protestant leanings and her family's connections to the powerful political elite. At the time, Jane was only 15 years old, and she had no real desire to rule or inherit the throne. But Jane's ascent to power was not one of her own making. It was the result of the political ambitions of others. When Edward VI died, Lady Jane was swiftly placed on the throne, with the support of her ambitious parents and advisers, including the Duke of Northumberland, who saw her as a means to maintain Protestant control in England. But Jane's reign was anything but secure. Her rise to power was challenged by her cousin Mary Tudor, the rightful heir to the throne under Henry VIII's succession laws. Mary, a Catholic, was supported by large sections of the population, including those who saw Jane's coronation as illegitimate and a result of manipulation by powerful Protestant factions. Jane's reign, which lasted only 9 days, was marked by her deep sense of duty, but also by her lack of control over her own destiny. While Jane was a pawn in the political machinations of the time, she tried to act with dignity and perform her role as queen to the best of her ability. She never actively sought the throne and, after being crowned, had no real power to make decisions. Her reign was more of a brief interlude in the ongoing struggle between Catholic and Protestant factions in England. The rapid downfall of Jane's reign came when Mary Tudor, with widespread support from the English people and much of the nobility, declared herself queen. A rebellion broke out, and Lady Jane was swiftly deposed. Her brief reign came to an end on July 19, 1553, when she was imprisoned in the Tower of London. Though Mary initially showed some mercy, Jane was later executed in 1554 at the age of 16 under charges of treason after her involvement in a failed plot to overthrow Mary's government. Her death sealed her place in history as one of England's most tragic monarchs. Lady Jane Grey's story is one of tragic irony. A young woman who was thrust into a dangerous political situation, one in which she had no real agency, and ultimately lost her life for the ambitions of others. Her reign, though short, left a lasting legacy, primarily because of the injustice of her execution. Jane was seen by many as a sacrificial figure, a pawn in the larger struggle between Catholicism and Protestantism. Her tragic end continues to provoke sympathy and interest, as historians examine the consequences of her elevation to the throne. What makes Lady Jane Grey's story particularly poignant is the fact that she was so young, so intelligent, and so innocent in her approach to power. She was not like the ambitious queens we've seen before, like Margaret of Anjou or Catherine de Medici, who fought fiercely for control of their countries. Jane was a victim of the political forces around her, someone who had little say in her fate. Her reign, though brief, was an example of how fragile a woman's power could be during the medieval period. In modern interpretations, Lady Jane is often seen as a martyr for the Protestant cause, a young queen sacrificed in a battle between two factions of English society. Her image as an innocent victim has been romanticised in various historical accounts, novels and films, and she is frequently portrayed as a tragic heroine wronged by those around her. In fact, much of what we know about her is coloured by her portrayal as an innocent pawn in the hands of others. Yet, in the broader context of medieval queenship, Lady Jane's story also reveals the inherent dangers of monarchy for women in an era of political instability. Historians still debate whether Lady Jane Grey's execution was entirely political or whether it was influenced by religious factors. It's clear that she became a symbol of the religious divisions in England. Her death helped solidify Mary IV's reign and Catholic restoration in England, while simultaneously cementing Jane's place as a Protestant martyr. In many ways, her legacy is both tragic and ironic. Though she never sought the throne, her very presence in the royal line created a political storm that ended with her tragic execution. Lady Jane Grey's story also raises important questions about the role of women in medieval politics. She is often considered a queen without a crown in the most literal sense. Her reign was not of her own choosing, and she had little control over her own fate. Yet her story remains a critical part of the history of English monarchy. She was, for a fleeting moment, a symbol of the Protestant cause, and her legacy continues to resonate with those who study the lives of medieval queens. The story of Lady Jane Grey serves as a reminder of the precariousness of power, especially for women in an era where their roles were often determined by the will of powerful men. Her life and death exemplify how women in positions of power could be used and discarded as political pawns, and how, in the end, their legacies were shaped by the men who held the true authority. Now, let's turn to one of the most fascinating figures of Renaissance Italy, Lucrezia Borgia. Often remembered for the scandal surrounding her family and her alleged involvement in political intrigue and poisonings, Lucrezia's life was marked by both tragedy and power. She was a woman caught in the complex and often dangerous world of papal politics, where power, family loyalty, and personal ambition collided in a way that shaped her destiny. Her life is one of both myth and reality, as the true nature of her involvement in the Borgia family's notorious reputation is still debated by historians today. Born in 1480, Lucrezia was the daughter of Rodrigo Borgia, who would later become Pope Alexander VI, and his mistress, Vanozza de Catanei. From a young age, Lucrezia was thrust into the political machinations of her father's papacy. The Borgia family, known for its ambitious rise to power, was deeply involved in the politics of the Catholic Church, and Lucrezia's marriage alliances were frequently used as tools to secure political power and strengthen her father's position. Her first marriage was to Giovanni Sforza, the Lord of Pesaro, when she was just 13 years old. The marriage, however, was a political one, arranged to solidify her father's influence over the Sforza family. The union was never consummated, and Lucrezia's marriage was annulled a few years later, much to her own relief. Historians have long speculated about the nature of Lucrezia's relationship with Giovanni Sforza, with some suggesting that her annulment was the result of Giovanni's refusal to comply with the Borgia family's political needs. Others argue that the annulment was politically motivated, designed to free Lucrezia for a more advantageous alliance. Lucrezia's second marriage in 1498 was to Alfonso of Aragon, the son of the King of Naples. This marriage was also a political maneuver, signed to solidify the Borgia family's influence over the Kingdom of Naples. However, Alfonso was soon found murdered in 1500 under mysterious circumstances. Some historians suggest that Lucrezia's brother, Cesare Borgia, may have been involved in Alfonso's death, as Cesare sought to consolidate power for the Borgia family and eliminate any potential threats to his control. The death of Alfonso cast a shadow over Lucrezia's second marriage, and rumours of her involvement in his murder began to swirl, further fueling the Borgia family's reputation for cruelty and intrigue. The most notorious aspect of Lucrezia's legacy, however, centres on the accusations that she was involved in poisoning her enemies. The Borgia family was notorious for their alleged use of poison as a political tool, with many believing that Lucrezia herself had a hand in the deaths of several of her family's rivals. The most famous of these rumours involved the use of a poison called cantarella, a substance that was believed to be capable of inducing a slow and seemingly natural death. While historians have never been able to conclusively prove Lucrezia's involvement in any murders, the rumours surrounding her and her family's use of poison became deeply entrenched in the Borgia legend. Despite the scandalous reputation of her family, Lucrezia was, in many ways, a victim of her circumstances. As a woman in a patriarchal society, her life was largely controlled by the men around her. Her marriages were arranged by her father to secure political alliances, and her role was often confined to being a pawn in the family's larger power games. However, Lucrezia was also known for her intelligence, political acumen, and charm. After the death of her second husband, she was briefly widowed, but she later remarried to Alfonso d'Este, the Duke of Ferrara, in 1502. This marriage was a more genuine one, and Lucrezia was able to exercise more personal autonomy in her later years. As Duchess of Ferrara, she wielded considerable influence, particularly in the cultural and political affairs of her court. She was a patron of the arts and an important figure in the Italian Renaissance, and her court became known for its literary and artistic achievements. The image of Lucrezia Borgia as a power-hungry and ruthless woman is largely the result of the political intrigue that surrounded her family, particularly her father, Pope Alexander VI, and her brother, Cesare Borgia. While the Borgia family's political machinations were certainly ruthless, Lucrezia herself was often an innocent bystander, caught up in events beyond her control. Historians have debated her role in the family's numerous scandals, and while it is clear that she was not above political manoeuvring, there is little evidence to suggest that she was actively involved in the many murders and intrigues associated with the Borgia name. In fact, there is evidence to suggest that Lucrezia was often a pawn, used by her father and brother in their political games, rather than a mastermind behind the Borgia family's most notorious actions. Lucrezia's legacy is a complex one, as her life has been both mythologized and demonized by historians. In the centuries following her death, she was portrayed as a femme fatale, a poisoner, and a symbol of the corruption and decadence of the Borgia family. Yet, modern historians have begun to re-evaluate her role in history, recognizing that much of the scandal surrounding her life was a product of the political and religious dynamics of her time. As the daughter of a pope, she was thrust into a world of political intrigue and power struggles, and her life was often shaped by forces beyond her control. In many ways, Lucrezia's story is one of survival, surviving the rumors and scandals that surrounded her, surviving the political battles of the Renaissance court, and ultimately becoming a respected figure in her own right. Lucrezia Borgia's life was one of contradictions. She was a woman of grace and charm who was also embroiled in the most ruthless power struggles of the Italian Renaissance. She was both a victim of the political ambitions of her family and a woman who, in her later years, found a measure of autonomy and influence in her own right. Her legacy is a reminder of the complexities of power, gender, and family loyalty in the medieval world, and the ways in which women were both constrained by and could, at times, wield power within the patriarchal systems of their time. In the end, Lucrezia Borgia's life serves as both a cautionary tale and an inspiration. While the myths surrounding her continue to captivate modern audiences, her story is ultimately one of resilience. A woman who, despite the scandalous reputation thrust upon her, found a way to carve out her own place in history, surviving the chaos and intrigue of the Renaissance world. Now let's move from the infamous Borgia court to the life of one of the most celebrated and often misunderstood queens in history, Lucrezia's contemporary and often tragic counterpart, Elizabeth I of England. Known as the Virgin Queen, Elizabeth's reign is remembered not only for its impressive political accomplishments, but for the unique way she wielded power in a time when women were expected to submit to the authority of men. Elizabeth's life was marked by both triumph and tragedy, and her influence on English and world history remains unparalleled. Elizabeth was born in 1533 to King Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn. Her early years were marked by uncertainty, as her mother was executed when Elizabeth was just 2 years old, leaving her with the stigma of being born to a marriage that had been declared illegal by the Catholic Church. For much of her early life, Elizabeth was considered illegitimate, with no clear path to the throne. However, after the death of her brother Edward VI and the death of her sister Mary I, Elizabeth became the last living Tudor heir. In 1558, at the age of 25, Elizabeth ascended to the throne of England following the death of Mary I. Her reign, which lasted for 44 years, is often regarded as one of the most successful in English history. The Elizabethan era, as it is known, was marked by an era of exploration, economic expansion, and cultural growth. Under Elizabeth, England solidified itself as a dominant power in Europe, famously defeating the Spanish Armada in 1588. This victory established England's military strength and cemented Elizabeth's place in history as one of the greatest military leaders of her time. Her reign also saw the flourishing of English literature, with the works of William Shakespeare and Christopher Marlowe, among others, helping to establish the English Renaissance. But Elizabeth's reign was not solely defined by military victories and cultural achievements. It was also a time of deep political and religious tension. Upon her ascension to the throne, England was deeply divided between Catholics and Protestants. Elizabeth, a Protestant, faced constant threats from Catholic powers, both within England and abroad. Throughout her reign, Elizabeth navigated the precarious balance between maintaining Protestant control in England while avoiding full-scale conflict with Catholic Europe. She adopted a policy of moderation, allowing for some religious tolerance while ensuring that the Church of England remained the state religion. This pragmatism allowed her to maintain stability in England, even as Catholic powers like Spain and France sought to undermine her rule. Despite her success as queen, Elizabeth's personal life was marked by a series of struggles that shaped both her character and her rule. One of the most notable aspects of her life was her decision never to marry. Known as the Virgin Queen, Elizabeth's refusal to marry has been the subject of much debate. Was it a strategic decision to maintain control over her power, or was it rooted in personal heartbreak stemming from the disappointment of her earlier relationships? Many historians believe that Elizabeth's refusal to marry was a political move designed to keep her in complete control of the throne. By remaining unmarried, Elizabeth could avoid the complications that would arise from sharing power with a king consort, as well as sidestep the pressures of dynastic marriage. This move allowed Elizabeth to maintain her position as the sole ruler of England and continue to wield immense political power without the constraints that came with a husband. Her relationships with suitors such as Robert Dudley and Francis, Duke of Anjou, have been the subject of much speculation. While Elizabeth's refusal to marry may have been a calculated political decision, it also reflected the unique position she occupied as a female monarch in a male-dominated world. Elizabeth's power was not dependent on her marriage or her ability to produce heirs, as was the case with most queens of her time. Her ability to govern effectively on her own terms without the aid of a husband made her one of the most influential female rulers in history. Elizabeth's reign, however, was not without its challenges. Despite her diplomatic prowess, she faced constant threats from within and outside of England. Perhaps the most significant of these was the threat posed by her cousin Mary, Queen of Scots. Mary, a Catholic queen, was seen by many as the legitimate heir to the English throne. Her rivalry with Elizabeth was fierce, and the two queens' relationship became emblematic of the religious and political tensions of the time. After Mary's forced abdication in Scotland, she sought refuge in England, where Elizabeth, fearing Mary's potential to incite rebellion, eventually imprisoned her. In 1587, after years of political intrigue, Mary was executed for plotting to assassinate Elizabeth, marking one of the most dramatic moments in Elizabeth's reign. Yet, despite these internal and external challenges, Elizabeth emerged as one of the most successful monarchs in history. Her ability to navigate the complex political landscape of her time and maintain control over both the English crown and the hearts of her people was unparalleled. Elizabeth was a ruler who embraced the idea of being the mother of her country, and she wielded her position with a combination of charm, strength, and calculated diplomacy. She was a monarch who knew how to inspire loyalty and affection from her subjects, while also knowing when to assert her authority and decisiveness in the face of political threat. Elizabeth's legacy extends far beyond her reign. She was a queen who not only preserved England's independence but also shaped its identity as a Protestant power in a Catholic-dominated Europe. Her defeat of the Spanish Armada, her support of English exploration and colonization, and her patronage of the arts and literature laid the foundation for the future success of the British Empire. She is remembered as a monarch who was both pragmatic and idealistic, a woman who maintained her independence while leading her country to greatness. As we reflect on Elizabeth's reign, her story offers a powerful example of the strength and resilience required for women to navigate the treacherous waters of medieval and early modern monarchy. Elizabeth's ability to maintain power without ever marrying, her diplomatic strategies, and her deep connection with her people allowed her to forge a lasting legacy that continues to resonate today. The Virgin Queen remains a symbol of the potential for women in power to shape history, not through marriage or dynastic alliances, but through intelligence, leadership, and independence. As we bring our exploration of powerful medieval queens to a close, let's reflect on the legacy of Mary Wards of England, often remembered as Bloody Mary, for her harsh persecution of Protestants during her reign. Though her time on the throne was short and filled with political and personal struggle, Mary's story remains one of deep tragedy, political conflict, and personal sacrifice. Her reign serves as a powerful reminder of the turbulent intersection of religion, politics, and gender in medieval monarchy, and how a queen's role could be shaped by forces far beyond her control. Mary Tudor was born in 1516 as the daughter of King Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon. Her early life was marked by the tumultuous and often painful changes in English politics, particularly her father's break with the Catholic Church in order to divorce her mother and marry Anne Boleyn. This decision not only led to a dramatic shift in England's religious landscape, but also left Mary, a devout Catholic, marginalised and disinherited from the English throne. For many years she lived as a virtual prisoner in her own country, rejected by her father and increasingly isolated from the political world. However, despite the challenges she faced, Mary remained steadfast in her faith and her belief in her eventual return to power. When her brother, Edward VI, died in 1553, Mary saw her opportunity to reclaim the throne, despite the fact that her cousin, Lady Jane Grey, had been declared queen by the Protestant faction. Mary quickly rallied support among both Catholics and some nobles who were disillusioned with the Protestant rule under Edward VI. Within days of Lady Jane's coronation, Mary gathered enough support to defeat her rival, and she was crowned Queen of England on July 19, 1553. Mary's reign, which lasted just 5 years, was marked by her intense desire to restore Catholicism to England. She immediately reversed her father's religious reforms, re-establishing the authority of the Pope and making Catholicism the official religion once again. However, her efforts to restore Catholicism were met with fierce resistance from the growing Protestant faction in England. This resistance culminated in the infamous executions of hundreds of Protestants, earning Mary the nickname Bloody Mary. The burnings at the stake of prominent Protestant leaders such as Hugh Latimer, Nicholas Ridley and Thomas Cranmer were some of the most notorious events of her reign. These executions, intended to eliminate the Protestant threat, were largely counterproductive, causing deep divisions within English society and further cementing the animosity between Catholics and Protestants. Many historians argue that Mary's policy of religious persecution not only failed to win over the hearts and minds of the people, but also set the stage for her eventual downfall. By the time she died in 1558, England was firmly entrenched in Protestantism, and her efforts to bring the country back to Catholicism had failed. Mary's personal life also played a significant role in shaping her reign. Her marriage to Philip II of Spain, a deeply Catholic monarch, was arranged as a political alliance to strengthen Catholic influence in England. However, the marriage proved deeply unpopular among the English, and Philip's presence in England was often met with hostility. Mary's inability to produce an heir with Philip further strained the marriage, and their union failed to secure the dynastic continuity that she had hoped for. Philip, though loyal to his wife, was distant and uninterested in England's political affairs, which only added to Mary's sense of isolation. Despite her personal and political struggles, Mary's reign also saw some successes. She was able to restore many of the traditional Catholic practices in England, including the reinstatement of the Mass and the veneration of saints. She also sought to stabilise the country's economy, which had been badly damaged under Edward VI's reign. However, these accomplishments were overshadowed by the violence of her religious policies, and her reign is often remembered as a period of brutality and religious intolerance. Mary's death in 1558 marked the end of the Tudor era of her father's reign, and with her passing, the throne passed to her sister Elizabeth I, the daughter of Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn. Elizabeth's ascent to the throne would usher in a new era of Protestant rule, and Mary's legacy would be shaped by the stark contrast between her Catholicism and Elizabeth's Protestantism. Elizabeth's reign would see the establishment of Protestantism as the dominant religion in England, and the divisions between Catholics and Protestants that Mary had tried to heal would only grow deeper. In modern times, Mary's legacy has been reassessed. While she was vilified by Protestant writers during her lifetime and in the years following her death, contemporary historians have begun to view her reign with more nuance. While her methods were harsh and her reign deeply divisive, it is clear that Mary's actions were driven by a genuine belief in her faith and a desire to restore what she saw as the rightful religious order of England. Her religious persecution, though brutal, was not born out of personal malice, but rather a desperate desire to restore unity and stability to the country. Mary's story is also a tragic one, as her personal struggles mirrored the larger political and religious upheavals of her time. She was a queen who faced immense challenges, both from within her own court and from the pressures of being a female monarch in a male-dominated world. Her struggles with marriage, her inability to secure a male heir, and the failure of her religious policies all contributed to her sense of isolation and frustration. In many ways, her life embodies the pressures that medieval queens often faced. The need to navigate the treacherous waters of power, religion, and personal loyalty in order to secure their legacies. Ultimately, Mary the Fee's legacy is one of complexity and contradiction. She is remembered both for her zealous attempts to restore Catholicism in England and for the bloody persecution that marred her reign. Her efforts to secure her place in history as a Catholic monarch ultimately failed, but she remains a powerful symbol of a woman who fought fiercely for her beliefs, even in the face of overwhelming opposition. Mary's reign is a reminder of the difficulties faced by queens in a world where their power was often limited by the men around them, and where their personal desires were often subjugated to the political and religious forces of the time. Mary V's story is also a reminder of the complexities of monarchy and the often precarious position of women in positions of power. Despite her many struggles and the failure of many of her policies, she remained a figure of determination and resilience, a queen whose reign, though brief, left an indelible mark on the history of England and the world.